Captain Mark Dalton had spent 15 years in the sky. He knew the sound of engines failing before alarms confirmed it. He knew how storms behaved over the Atlantic before satellite models updated. He even knew what silence meant in a fighter cockpit, real silence, the kind that meant something had gone wrong somewhere in the system. But he had never seen silence happen to the sky itself. "Sir, you need to see this," Lieutenant Owen Hale said. His voice wasn't panicked. That was worse. Hale only got quiet like that when reality stopped matching training. Mark stepped into the operations bay. The room was already wrong. No shouting. No overlapping radio chatter. No urgent cross-checks. Just dozens of analysts staring at screens like they were waiting for the world to start behaving normally again. It wasn't. "Report," Mark ordered. A technician swallowed hard. "Sir, all orbital objects are static." Mark frowned. "Define static." Hale pulled up the global display. Earth rotated slowly beneath a shell of tracked objects, satellites, debris fields, classified military platforms, even experimental probes that were never publicly acknowledged. All of them, frozen. Not drifting. Not orbiting. Just locked in place as if someone had pressed pause on reality. "That's not possible," Mark said immediately. Dr. Elias Renner, the orbital systems specialist, shook his head without looking away from the screen. "We thought it was a sensor glitch. Then we cross-checked 3 independent tracking systems. Then 5. Then international feeds." He finally looked at Mark. "All of them agree. Nothing in low Earth orbit is moving." Mark stepped closer to the display. His instincts rejected it before his mind even processed it. Orbital mechanics weren't optional. Gravity didn't negotiate. Satellites didn't just stop. "Debris too?" he asked. Hale nodded. "Everything. Even the junk we can't track properly, it's all fixed." A long silence stretched. Then Mark noticed something else. A subtle distortion above the Atlantic sector. A faint geometric shimmer, like heat haze bending light, but too structured. Too intentional. "What is that?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Because it wasn't on any system yet. Then the first alert hit. "Unknown orbital signature detected." Followed instantly by another. "Signal emergence. Global broadcast frequency lock." The room lights dimmed slightly as backup systems tried and failed to stabilize incoming interference. Then every radio channel, military, civilian, encrypted, emergency, collapsed into a single tone. A clean, precise carrier wave. And then words formed inside it. Not translated. Not decoded. Already in English. "This orbital layer is now under administrative control of the Varith Consortium." No one spoke. Not because they didn't understand. Because understanding it made it real. Mark felt something cold settle in his chest. Where did it come from? A junior analyst shook his head rapidly. No launch signature. No ascent profile. No propulsion trace. Nothing from ground, sea, or air. Hale whispered, "Sir, it didn't arrive from Earth." Mark turned sharply. "Then where did it come from?" Dr. Renner's voice was barely audible. "Above us." The display updated. New structures were forming in orbit. Not arriving. Assembling. Fractals of metallic geometry unfolded like invisible hands were constructing a cage around the planet. Sections locked into position without visible thrust, without exhaust, without reaction mass. And as they formed, Earth satellites stopped responding entirely. One by one, telemetry streams froze. Then vanished. Mark stared at the Atlantic sector again. The shimmer had become a lattice. A framework. A boundary. And for the first time in his career, Captain Mark Dalton realized something that every human on Earth was about to learn. Whatever was up there was not visiting. It was taking inventory. And Earth had just become something measurable. The first reaction from Earth's command centers was denial. Not disagreement, denial. Because disagreement meant you accepted the premise. And no one in the Pentagon, NORAD, or the European Space Directorate was ready to accept that something had just paused orbital mechanics like it was a simulation. Captain Mark Dalton stood in front of the main tactical display as it refreshed again. Still static. Every satellite. Every debris field. Every classified platform that wasn't supposed to exist on any civilian database. Frozen in place above Earth like a halo of suspended glass. "Run diagnostics again," Mark ordered. Lieutenant Owen Hale didn't move. "We already did. 3 times. Do it again." A pause. Then Hale exhaled sharply and reran the system anyway. Dr. Elias Renner, orbit specialist, was already pacing behind them. This isn't a system failure. If it were, we'd see drift errors, decay anomalies, something. But this is uniform. He pointed at the projection. Every object is held at its orbital velocity, but not allowed to progress along its trajectory. Mark narrowed his eyes. Meaning what? Renner hesitated. Meaning physics is still intact. Something is overriding motion, not gravity itself. A technician in the corner muttered, "That's worse." No one disagreed. Then the second transmission hit. It didn't come through channels. It came through everything. Every speaker in the facility. Every headset. Every monitor. Even backup systems that were supposed to be air-gapped flickered alive. A tone first. Then words. This orbital layer is now under administrative control of the Varith Consortium. The room went still. Mark felt it immediately, not fear exactly, but the shift in scale. Like standing on solid ground and suddenly realizing the ground wasn't yours. Hale broke the silence first. Administrative control? Renner laughed once, sharp and humorless. That's not a military term. Mark turned sharply. Explain. Renner stopped pacing. It's bureaucratic language. Not conquest language. Not even territorial claim language. It implies governance. Regulation. That doesn't matter, Mark said. We don't get regulated by something that didn't announce itself. As if answering him, the broadcast continued. Human orbital assets have been classified as unregistered infrastructure. Disabling protocol initiated. The tactical display flickered. A line of satellites blinked off the map. Then another. And another. Not explosions. Not decay signatures. Just deletion from tracking systems as if someone had erased them from a ledger. Hale stepped back. They're removing them from our sensors. Mark shook his head. No. Sensors don't fail like that selectively. Renner's face had gone pale. Unless they're not failing the sensors. A beat of silence. Then Hale whispered, "What does that mean?" Renner answered quietly. "It means the objects are still there, but we're being told they aren't." The room temperature seemed to drop. Mark looked at the Atlantic sector again. The shimmer had expanded. Now it wasn't just a distortion, it was structure. Massive geometric frames unfolding in silence, locking into positions above Earth's curvature like a scaffolding being built around the planet. No propulsion. No reaction jets. No debris. Just assembly. And then the third transmission arrived. This one was different. It wasn't broadcast globally. It was targeted. Specifically. To Earth's defense networks. And to Captain Mark Dalton's cockpit systems. Mark froze. "Why is this coming to my jet?" Hale checked the console. "Sir, it's not routed. It's direct." Renner leaned in. "That's impossible." The message resolved on every screen it reached. "You are authorized to observe. Do not interfere." Hale blinked. "That's, to us?" Then a second line appeared. "Your species is PI orbital. Your space layer is now under interdiction review." Mark felt his jaw tighten. "Pre-orbital." Renner swallowed. "It means they don't recognize us as a spacefaring civilization." Hale looked up sharply. "We have satellites. Space stations. We have." "Not according to them," Renner interrupted. The display zoomed automatically. Not by human command. Something else was controlling the interface now. A full view of Earth appeared, wrapped in the newly formed orbital lattice. And beneath it, the satellites continued to vanish from tracking systems one by one. Then came the final line of Part 2. Non-compliant orbital objects will be removed. Mark stared at it. Then quietly said, "Removed how?" No one answered. Because at that exact moment, one of the missing satellites reappeared for half a second. Not in orbit. Not intact. Just a fragmented image, like a memory of structure collapsing into nothing. Then it was gone again. And the sky outside Earth's atmosphere remained perfectly, unnaturally still. The silence after the second transmission didn't last long. It never did in crises like this. Silence only meant systems were catching up to fear. Captain Mark Dalton stood motionless as the tactical display stabilized again, though stabilized was now a generous word. Nothing about it felt stable anymore. The orbital map still showed Earth wrapped in that impossible lattice of structures, too clean, too intentional, too vast to be accidental. And still, nothing moved. Not debris. Not satellites. Not even the faintest drift in low Earth orbit that every engineer knew was unavoidable. Lieutenant Owen Hale finally spoke. Sir, we just lost the communication relay over the Pacific node. Mark didn't look away from the display. Lost as in offline? Hale hesitated. Lost as in, it's no longer listed anywhere. That got Mark's attention. He turned. Explain. Dr. Elias Renner was already there, pulling up cross-checks across 3 independent systems. His fingers moved faster now, but there was a strain behind it, like he was trying to outrun a conclusion he didn't want to reach. It's not just that we can't see it, Renner said. It's that no system agrees it ever existed in the first place. Mark felt something tighten in his chest. That's impossible. Not according to physics, Renner replied. According to information control, maybe. Hale frowned. You're saying they're deleting records? Renner shook his head slowly. Not deleting. Rewriting. Or, overriding perception. The phrase hung in the room like something too large to process quickly. Then the third transmission arrived. No warning tone this time. No build-up. Just immediate presence. Every speaker, every terminal, every secure line, collapsed into the same voice again. You are a Airspace species. By galactic protocol, your orbital layer is restricted. Mark exhaled sharply. Restricted. Hale looked at him. Like, airspace restriction? Renner answered before Mark could. No. That's territorial. This is classification-based. Mark turned. Meaning? Renner hesitated. Meaning they don't think we belong there. A pause. Then Hale said quietly, we're already there. Renner met his eyes. Not in their system. The orbital display zoomed again without command. The lattice above Earth expanded visually, revealing layers upon layers of structured geometry. It wasn't a fleet. It wasn't a station. It was something closer to an infrastructure, like roads in space, or invisible laws given physical form. And then Mark saw it. Between the structures were pathways, corridors, controlled lanes, orbital traffic routes. But not designed for human satellites. Designed for something larger. Something faster. Something precise. Hale pointed. Those aren't random placements. Renner nodded slowly. They're organizing orbital mechanics. Mark frowned. You can't organize orbital mechanics. Renner looked at him. We can't. Another transmission cut through the room. All human orbital technology is to be disabled. Non-compliance will result in removal. Hale stiffened. There it is again. Mark stepped closer to the console. Define removal. No response came. Instead, the Pacific relay flickered back onto the display for exactly 1 second. Mark saw it clearly. Then he wished he hadn't. The satellite wasn't just gone from orbit. It was unmade from tracking space entirely. Not destroyed in a conventional sense. There were no fragments, no debris field, no heat signature. Just absence. A hole where existence had been. Hale backed away slightly. That's not jamming. That's not interference. Renner finished it quietly. That's authority. Mark turned sharply. Authority. Renner nodded once. They're not attacking our satellites. They're asserting jurisdiction over whether they're allowed to be considered real. A long silence followed. Then Hale whispered, that's insane. Renner replied, so is orbital mechanics stopping without explanation. Yet here we are. Mark looked back at the sky projection. The structures above Earth had finished forming their primary lattice. Now smaller components were unfolding, fine adjustments, like calibration. And then the final line of the transmission appeared. Surface civilization may continue under observation. Hale frowned. Observation. Mark didn't answer immediately. Because something about that word felt worse than everything else. Observation didn't imply conflict. It implied study. Classification. Containment. Dr. Renner spoke quietly. We're not being invaded. Mark didn't look away from the screen. No. We're being evaluated, Renner continued. Hale shook his head. By something that can rewrite satellite existence. Mark finally spoke. If they wanted us gone, he said, we wouldn't be having this conversation. No one argued. Because deep down, they all understood the truth forming above Earth. The aliens, whoever they were, weren't trying to win a war. They were enforcing a system. And Earth had just discovered it was already inside it. Outside the command center, Through reinforced glass, the sky looked normal. Blue. Calm. Familiar. But Mark Dalton knew better now. The sky wasn't empty. It was governed. The emergency summit began like every global crisis meeting always did. Too many voices, too many flags, and not enough answers. But within minutes, it became something else entirely. Chaos. Captain Mark Dalton wasn't physically in the United Nations Security Emergency Chamber in New York, but his feed was live through military command. He watched it unfold on a secure screen in the operations center, where even hardened officers had stopped pretending this was manageable. Ambassadorials shouted over one another. Military advisors demanded confirmation that it was a hostile act. Scientists insisted it wasn't even a contact scenario in the traditional sense. And somewhere in the noise, a single phrase kept repeating in different forms. We didn't detect a launch. Dr. Elias Renner stood behind Mark, arms crossed tightly. That's the core problem, he said quietly. Everything we know about escalation assumes we saw something arrive. We didn't. Lieutenant Owen Hale leaned forward. So what do we do if we can't even track the enemy moving into position? Renner didn't answer immediately. Because the uncomfortable truth was already forming in everyone's mind. You don't fight something you can't observe entering the battlefield. On the UN feed, the Secretary-General raised a hand, forcing silence across the chamber. We require verification, he said firmly. We need confirmation of intent before any defensive posture is. The transmission interrupted him mid-sentence. Not from Earth systems. Not from a broadcast channel. It simply overrode the room. Every screen in the chamber flickered. Every microphone opened. And the same voice returned. You are authorized to communicate. Your orbital assets are non-compliant. A ripple of shock went through the chamber. One delegate stood abruptly. That's not a translation protocol. How is it speaking in every language simultaneously? Renner, watching remotely, whispered, it's not translating. It's inserting meaning directly into comprehension layers. Hale turned toward him. Meaning what? Renner's expression darkened. Meaning it's bypassing language entirely. On the UN feed, panic was starting to break containment. Security personnel moved toward exits. Some diplomats shouted for evacuation protocols. Others demanded retaliation options. But Mark noticed something else. The alien message wasn't addressed to governments anymore. It had shifted. Now it was addressing infrastructure. Orbital telemetry systems. Communication satellites. Navigation grids. And then, the display above Earth changed again. A clean, structured overlay appeared across the planetary projection. Zones. Boundaries. Lanes of permitted orbital motion. Mark frowned. They're mapping us. Renner nodded slowly. No. They're classifying us. Hale looked up sharply. Classifying what? Renner pointed at the screen. Everything we've put in orbit. They're sorting it into categories we didn't define. Mark stepped closer. That's impossible. Classification requires intent. Renner shook his head. Not if you're the one writing the rules. On the global display, human satellites began to blink again, but not in the chaotic disappearance pattern from before. Now it was structured. Systematic. Like inventory being checked against a ledger. Hale whispered, they're turning off our space infrastructure one by one. Mark corrected him. No. They're deciding what counts as infrastructure. A new alert flashed across the command system. Orbital communication network degraded. Cause, administrative reclassification. Hale blinked. Administrative. Renner gave a bitter half-smile. They're not calling it war. Mark's jaw tightened. Then what are they calling it? Renner looked at the frozen orbital map. Maintenance. A heavy silence settled in the room. Then another transmission arrived. Humanity has entered preliminary contact status. Response protocol, observation only. Hale frowned. That sounds passive. Mark didn't take his eyes off the screen. It's not passive. Renner nodded once. It's containment language. On the UN feed, the Secretary-General tried again. We demand clarification of your intentions. For the first time, the alien system responded directly to that line. Intention, maintain orbital order. Human presence is unregistered in orbital layer 3. Mark frowned. Orbital layer 3. Renner was already calculating. They're dividing space into governance strata. Low Earth orbit, medium orbit, geostationary, but not by our definitions. Hale looked uneasy. So where do we fit? Rena didn't answer immediately, because the answer was already visible. On the projection, Earth was labeled at the center. Around it, structured orbital layers formed like concentric systems of regulation. And humanity's satellites, every single one, had been pushed into a single category. Unverified infrastructure. Mark exhaled slowly. They're treating us like we don't belong there. Rena corrected him softly. No. They're treating us like we never asked permission. Hale shook his head. We built satellites. We launched stations. We have crews in orbit. Rena looked at him. And none of that matters if someone else controls the definition of orbit. A pause. Then Mark spoke quietly. So what happens if we don't comply? No one answered immediately, because the Pacific relay had just reappeared for a fraction of a second again. And this time, Mark saw something different. Not destruction. Not deletion. A transition. The satellite didn't vanish. It was moved out of classification space entirely, as if removed from the universe's official records. Rena whispered, almost to himself. They're not destroying our satellites. He looked up at the frozen sky projection. They're deciding whether they were ever allowed to exist in the first place. The atmosphere inside the command center had changed. Not in temperature. Not in lighting. But in something harder to define, like the building itself had begun to feel smaller in relation to what was happening above it. Captain Mark Dalton stood with his arms folded behind his back, staring at the orbital projection. Earth still turned beneath the strange, geometric lattice that had replaced everything they once called space traffic. Nothing moved. Nothing drifted. Even the concept of chaos in orbit seemed to have been overwritten. Lieutenant Owen Hale broke the silence first. Sir, Command is requesting confirmation on whether we engage defensive protocols. Mark didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in his career, defensive protocols felt like a phrase designed for a universe that still behaved normally. Dr. Elias Renner stood slightly behind him, eyes fixed on the screen. There is no engagement scenario, he said quietly. You don't engage something that defines the system you're inside of. Hale frowned. So what do we do? Just watch. Renner didn't look at him. That's what we're being told to do. As if responding to the word told, every console in the room flickered again. A tone. Clean. Precise. Absolute. Then the final transmission stabilized across all systems at once. Earth orbit is a controlled layer. Surface civilization may continue under observation. The words were calm. Almost clinical. No threat. No aggression. No emotion. That made it worse. Hale stepped back slightly. Controlled layer. Mark exhaled slowly. They've categorized us. Renner nodded. Not invaded. Not contacted. Classified. Hale shook his head. That doesn't make sense. We're talking about independent satellites, human space stations, international infrastructure. Mark cut him off. All of which are now defined by something else. A pause. The orbital display zoomed out further. Earth sat at the center like an exhibit. Around it, the lattice structure expanded into clearer definition, interlocking orbital lanes, gravitational corridors, and structured zones that looked less like construction and more like governance infrastructure. Renner spoke quietly. They're not occupying orbit. Hale looked at him. Then what are they doing? Renner hesitated. Then said the word no one in the room wanted to hear. Regulating it. Mark's jaw tightened. That implies jurisdiction. Renner nodded once. Exactly. On the screen, human satellites were still present, but no longer in motion. Some had been removed from tracking entirely. Others remained but were locked into fixed positions, as if held in administrative suspension. Hale pointed. Those are ours. Renner corrected him immediately. They were. Mark turned slightly. What do you mean were? Renner met his eyes. Ownership requires recognition. Right now, nothing in orbit is being recognized under human authority. A long silence followed. Then Hale said, quieter now, so they just decide what space is. Renner replied, yes. Mark stared at the projection for a long moment. Then spoke carefully. If they control orbit, they control everything above us. Communications. Surveillance. Navigation. Defense warning systems. Hale nodded grimly. Global infrastructure. Renner added, and escalation pathways. That word hung in the air. Escalation. Mark finally looked away from the display and toward the room itself, as if grounding himself in something still physical. "Patch me through to all command channels," he said. Hale hesitated. "Sir. I want global military frequencies open." Renner looked at him sharply. "That's not going to change their classification." Mark's voice was calm. "I'm not trying to change theirs." A pause. "I'm making ours." The channel opened. Across continents, military command centers, naval fleets, air defense grids, and orbital tracking stations all connected into a single broadcast relay. And Mark spoke. "This is Captain Mark Dalton, United Earthspace Defense Command." A beat. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what your system allows or doesn't allow." He paused, choosing words carefully. "But Earth is not an unregistered asset." In the command center, Hale looked up sharply. "Sir." Mark continued. "We have operated orbital infrastructure for decades under international law, coordination, and recognized ownership structures. Your classification does not supersede that." Renner whispered, almost to himself, his asserting jurisdiction back. On the orbital display, something changed. Subtle. A faint recalibration of the lattice. Mark noticed it immediately. He continued. "If you are capable of governing orbital space, then you are also capable of receiving acknowledgement of existing governance systems." A pause. Then, for the first time, the alien system responded in a slightly different pattern. Not a new message. A modification of the old one. Earth orbit is a controlled layer. Surface civilization may continue under observation. Then a second line appeared beneath it. Request, clarification of human governance claim. Hale blinked. "They're asking us to define ourselves." Renner nodded slowly. "They're updating classification based on input." Mark looked at the screen. For the first time, the system wasn't just acting. It was negotiating parameters. And that meant something no one in the room was ready to say out loud yet. Earth wasn't being conquered. It was being processed. Mark spoke again into the channel, voice steady. "We are a planetary civilization with sovereign claim over our orbital infrastructure." A pause. Then the orbital lattice shifted again. Not aggressively. Not defensively. But like a system updating a record. And in that moment, Captain Mark Dalton realized the most unsettling truth of all. Whatever was above Earth wasn't judging humanity. It was trying to decide how to file it.